The letter arrived on a Thursday, and by Friday her stepmother had already burned it. Maren did not see it happen. She only saw the ash in the grate when she came downstairs that morning, and the particular way her stepmother's hands were folded in her lap. Too still, too deliberate, the way they always were when something had already been decided and there was no use discussing it. "Someone wrote to you," Maren said. "No one wrote to you," her stepmother replied. "Sit down and eat your breakfast." She was 22 years old, and she had been living in her father's house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome for 3 years, since her father died. Since the will was read and the solicitor had looked at her across his desk with an expression she could not quite name, pity, she thought, or possibly discomfort, and told her that Harwick Hall had been left entirely to her stepmother to be managed in trust, and that Maren's inheritance would be held until her 25th birthday, provided she remained in residence, and caused no difficulty. She had not caused any difficulty. She had learned very quickly that causing difficulty only made things worse. The ash in the grate was black and fine. She could not have said with certainty that it had been a letter. But her stepmother's hands did not fold that way over nothing, and Maren had grown very good at reading the small signs. She ate her breakfast. She did not ask again. 3 weeks later, the carriage came. Not their carriage. They had sold the good one 2 winters ago, and what remained was a hired vehicle that smelled of other people's dogs. This carriage was dark blue with a crest on the door that Maren recognized from the papers her father had kept in his study. She had been in that study only twice in her adult life, and both times without permission, and both times she had stood at his desk for a long moment before she allowed herself to look at anything, as though she needed to earn the right to be there. She was in the garden when the carriage arrived, pulling weeds, which was not something a woman of her station was supposed to do. But the garden had been neglected for 2 years, and the roses her mother had planted were being strangled by convolvulus, and no one else was going to save them. She heard the wheels on the drive and stood up and looked, and the first thing she noticed was the footman's livery, which was the dark blue of the carriage and very well kept, the kind of livery that indicated a household that had not had to make economies. The second thing she noticed was her stepmother, appearing at the front door with a speed that was almost undignified, which meant she had been watching from the window. Maren pulled off her gardening gloves and walked toward the house. She was not invited. That had never stopped her from knowing what was happening under her own father's roof. She came in through the side entrance, which put her in the corridor just off the entrance hall, and she stood in the shadow of the doorway and listened. The solicitor's name was Pemberton. He was not the same solicitor who had read the will. This one was younger, and he spoke in the careful, measured way of a man who had been trained to give bad news without appearing to give it. He was not giving bad news. He was, Maren understood after a moment, giving an offer. The Duke of Coldren was looking for a housekeeper. His previous housekeeper, a Mrs. something or other, had retired. The position required a woman of good background and sound character, with experience managing a large household. The salary was substantial. The position included rooms in the East Wing. Her stepmother's voice, when she spoke, had a quality Maren recognized, the careful brightness of someone trying to hide that they were calculating. "My stepdaughter," her stepmother said. "She has considerable experience managing a household. She is discreet and capable. I believe she would suit." There was a pause. "Your stepdaughter," Pemberton said. "Miss Maren Westall. She uses her mother's name. Her father was Sir Aldous Brennan." Another pause, longer this time. Maren pressed her back against the wall and breathed very quietly. "I see," Pemberton said. "And Miss Westall is aware of this offer?" "She will be," her stepmother said, with the particular confidence of someone who has already made a decision on another person's behalf. She'll be delighted. She's been looking for occupation." Maren closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and walked into the entrance hall, still holding her gardening gloves. "How do you do?" she said to Pemberton. "I'm Maren Westall. I heard my name." Her stepmother's expression went very smooth, very fast. Pemberton looked at her dress, which was plain, and her gloves, which were dirty, and her hands, which were not the hands of someone who had been idle. And then he looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Not pity. Something more like recognition, though she could not have said what he recognized. "Miss Westall," he said. "I was just describing a position that may be of interest to you." "A housekeeper's position," Maren said. "At Coldren." "Yes. Under what name?" He blinked. Her stepmother made a small, sharp movement that men felt without looking at. "I beg your pardon," Pemberton said. "If I am to present myself as a housekeeper," Maren said, keeping her voice very even, "I would need to use a name appropriate to the position, not my own. I was wondering if that detail had been discussed, or if I was expected to manage it myself." She looked at her stepmother then, just once, briefly. Her stepmother's face was composed, but her hands, there were those hands again, were folded too tightly in her lap. "I believe," Pemberton said after a moment, "that such details can be arranged." She left Harwick Hall on a Tuesday, which was the same day of the week her mother had died, 12 years ago. She did not think this was significant. She thought about it anyway. Her stepmother saw her off at the door, which was courtesy, and nothing more, and when she clasped Maren's hands in farewell, her grip was very firm. The way a grip is firm when it is meant to remind rather than comfort. "Do not embarrass us," her stepmother said. Maren looked at her for a long moment. "I never have," she said. She got into the carriage and did not look back at the house, though she thought about the roses, and whether anyone would think to pull the convolvulus before it strangled them entirely. Coldren was 4 hours north by road, and she had the carriage to herself, which was a luxury she had not had in some time. She used the first hour to think. She used the second hour to stop thinking and simply watch the countryside, which had the pale quality of early autumn, the fields going brown at the edges, the light coming in low and golden through the window. The third and fourth hours she spent reviewing what she knew about Coldren, which was less than she would have liked. Her father had spoken of the Duke once, that she could recall. A brief mention, something about an old debt of honor. She had been perhaps 12, and she had not paid full attention, because she had been reading. She wished now that she had paid attention. She wished for a great many things she could not have, and had learned to ration her wishing accordingly, what she knew. The Duke of Coldren was called Harlan. Not this Duke, his father, who had died 7 years ago. The current Duke was Emery Harlan, and he was said to be private and difficult, and his wife had died in childbirth 3 years ago along with the child, and he had not in the time since done anything that suggested he intended to marry again or indeed to do anything at all except manage his estate and refuse invitations. She did not know what she was walking into. She found she was not afraid, exactly. It was more like the feeling before a storm. Not dread, but a kind of alive alertness, every sense slightly sharper than usual. The housekeeper who met her at the servants' entrance was a small woman named Mrs. Tolle, who had been at Coldren for 20 years, and who looked at Maren with the particular expression of a woman who has seen many things and formed opinions about most of them. "Miss Westall," she said, "I was told to expect you." "I hope I'm not a disappointment," Maren said. Mrs. Tolle looked at her for another moment. "We'll see," she said. "Come in out of the cold." Maren came in. The kitchens at Coldren were large and warm and smelled of something savory that she could not immediately identify. There were 2 kitchen maids she did not catch the names of, and a cook called Mr. Dane who did not look up from what he was doing, and a footman named Gill who was new and anxious and knocked a pan off the counter within 30 seconds of Maren's arrival. She helped him pick it up without being asked, which made Mrs. Tolle look at her again, differently this time. "The Duke takes his supper at 7, Mrs. Tolle said as she walked Maren through the house. "He does not like to be disturbed before 11 in the morning. He works late. He prefers the library cold and will not have the fire lit before 3 in the afternoon. He does not take breakfast in company. He does not. Does he speak much?" Maren said. Mrs. Tolle paused. "When he has something to say," she said. They had come out of the servants' corridor and into the main hall, which was the sort of room that stopped you, not because it was opulent. It was not, particularly, but because it had the weight of time in it. The portraits were dark with age. The floors were the kind of worn oak that spoke of generations of feet. There was a staircase that went up and then turned, and at the landing there was a window that let in the afternoon light in a long, slanted column. There was a man at the top of the stairs. He was looking down at them. At her, she realized, because Mrs. Tolle he already knew, with an expression that she could not read at that distance. Dark-coated, dark-haired, standing very still in the way that only certain kinds of people stand still, the way that suggests stillness is a choice rather than a default. "Your Grace," Mrs. Tolle said. "This is the new housekeeper, Miss Westall." He came down the stairs, not quickly, deliberately, with the unhurried ease of a man who has never needed to hurry for anything. He was perhaps 35, and he looked like his house, not remarkable in any single feature, but with a quality of accumulated weight, of having been shaped over time by things that mattered. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that were not from laughing. He looked at her. She looked back. "Miss Westall," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected. "Your Grace, you come from the South." It was not a question, but it was an opening, and she stepped into it carefully. "Harwickshire," she said. "Most recently," he repeated, as though the qualifier interested him. He was still looking at her with that expression she could not read. "What did you do before?" "I managed my family's household," she said. Which was the truth. It was simply not the whole truth. "For how long?" 3 years, she said. "Since my father died." Something in his face changed, briefly. Then it settled again into its careful neutrality. "Very well," he said. He looked at Mrs. Tolle. "Show her the east wing." He turned and went back up the stairs, and Maren stood in the hall and watched him go, and tried to identify the feeling that was sitting in her chest, quiet and unignorable. She thought, "I have been in this house before." Not Coldren itself, she had never been to Coldren, but this feeling, this sense of weight and old stone and something unfinished, like a sentence with no period. She had had this feeling in her father's study, standing at his desk. She followed Mrs. Tolle toward the east wing, and did not let herself look back at the staircase. She found the letters on her 4th day. She had been cataloging the library, which was part of her duties, and also, if she were honest, something she would have done regardless of whether it was her duty. The library at Coldren was the kind of library that had been assembled by people who actually read the books, rather than people who wanted to look as though they read books. And she had spent more time than was strictly professional, standing at the shelves and reading spines. The letters were in a drawer of the writing desk in the corner, tucked under a leather portfolio that had been there, long enough to leave a faint impression in the wood. She would not have opened the drawer except that she was taking inventory of the furniture, and the drawer was listed in the household records as correspondence, miscellaneous, to be filed. The letters were tied with a faded piece of ribbon. She should have closed the drawer. She did not close the drawer. The top letter was addressed in a handwriting she recognized as though from a dream. The particular slant of her father's letters, the way he crossed his sevens. She had not seen his handwriting in 3 years. She had not known, until this moment, that she missed it. She stood very still. The letter was addressed to the Duchess of Coldren. Her father had written to the previous Duchess. She thought about the ash in the grate. On a Thursday morning, the particular way her stepmother's hands had been folded. She closed the drawer. She did not take the letters. She did not read them. She stood in the library for a long moment, looking at nothing. And then she picked up her inventory list and went back to work, because there was nothing else to do, and because she needed to think before she did anything that could not be undone. The Duke came into the library at 3 o'clock, which was when the fire was finally permitted to be lit, and he found her on the upper gallery, reshelving a set of agricultural journals that had been misfiled among the histories. He did not say anything at first. He went to his desk, the writing desk, in the corner, and stood there for a moment before he sat down. She continued shelving journals. "You're doing it alphabetically," he said. "By subject first," she said, "and then alphabetically within each subject." It seemed more practical. He was quiet for a moment. She heard the drawer open. She made herself keep her eyes on the journals. Her hands were steady. She was rather proud of her hands. Miss Westall. She looked down from the gallery. He was holding the bundle of letters, and he was looking up at her, and his expression was different, not the careful neutrality she had grown accustomed to. Something more direct. "Do you know what these are?" he said. "No, Your Grace," she said. Which was the truth? She knew who they were from, she did not know what they contained. "Come down," he said. She came down the gallery stairs and stood across the desk from him, and he put the letters on the surface between them, not quite offering them, not quite withholding them. "These were written by a man named Brennan," he said, "Sir Aldous Brennan. He wrote to my mother over a period of about 6 years. She kept her face very still. "He died 3 years ago," the Duke said. "Did you know him?" And here it was. The moment she had not quite let herself imagine, because imagining it had felt too much like hoping for it. She said, "He was my father." The silence in the library was complete. She watched him take that in, watched the careful thing in his face go still, and then something beneath the stillness shift, the way a deep current shifts under water that appears perfectly flat from above. "Your father," he said. "Yes, you're Sir Aldous Brennan's daughter. Yes, Your Grace, and you came here as a housekeeper." She met his eyes. "I came here because my stepmother sent me here as one, and because it seemed better to come than not to." He looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. "Sit down," he said. His voice had changed. It was not unkind. She sat. He did not sit. He stood by the window instead, with the letters still in his hand, and for a while neither of them said anything. Outside, a wind had come up, the kind of October wind that carries the smell of leaves and wet earth, and the light through the window was already going the deep gold of late afternoon. "My mother spoke of your father," he said at last, "after she was gone. She died when I was 19. I found her correspondence. His name was in it. She wrote about him as though he mattered a great deal to her." He paused. "I did not know, until I found these letters last year, that he had also written to her." "What do they say?" Maren asked. She had not meant to ask. It came out before she could stop it. He looked at her. "He was asking her for help," he said quietly. "He believed there was something wrong with his will, that someone had tampered with it before it was witnessed. He wrote to my mother because he trusted her. She had been his friend before she was anything else." He paused again. "My mother died before she could act on it. And the letters were here in this drawer, and I did not know what I was looking at until your name was given to me by my solicitor." Maren sat very still. "You knew," she said. He turned to look at her. "I suspected. You brought me here on purpose." "I brought you here," he said carefully, "because I wanted to understand what had happened to your father's estate. Before I did anything that might make things worse for his daughter, I did not know what situation you were in. I did not know if you were aware of any of this. I did not know." He stopped. "I knew very little, Miss Westall. I erred on the side of giving you time and a situation that was safe while I made inquiries." She looked at him for a long moment. "You made inquiries," she said. "Yes, about my stepmother." "Yes." And he set the letters down on the desk between them again, and this time he slid them toward her. She picked them up. She untied the ribbon, which came apart easily, as though it had been waiting. Her father's handwriting, the particular slant, the way he crossed his sevens. The last letter was dated 4 months before he died. She read it to the end. When she put it down carefully on the desks and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the surface, palms down, feeling the cool wood, because she needed to feel something solid. "He knew," she said. "He knew she had done something to the will." "He suspected," the Duke said. "He did not have proof. That is what he was asking my mother for. Not money, not intervention. Just access to her solicitor, a man he believed was honest. And your mother died 3 months after that letter was sent, and my father died 4 months after he wrote it." They sat with that for a moment, and the fire crackled, and the wind moved in the old window frames with the comfortable domestic sound of a house settling into itself. "What do you intend to do?" Maren said. He looked at her. "That depends," he said, "on what you want." She had not been asked that in 3 years, possibly longer. The question sat in the air between them, and she did not immediately know what to do with it. "I want my father's estate," she said. "I want what was his to come to me as he intended it to. I want—" She stopped. She started again, more carefully. "I want it done properly, through legal channels. I don't want anything that can be appealed or challenged afterward. That will take time," he said. "I know. And in the meantime?" She looked at the letters in her hands. "In the meantime I am, apparently, your housekeeper." Something changed in his face. Not quite a smile. The possibility of a smile, if a smile had been the kind of thing he permitted himself. "The agricultural journals," he said. "You were shelving them by subject, and then alphabetically." "Yes, that is not how they were originally organized. No, the original system was inconsistent. The original system was my mother's." She looked up at him quickly. He was looking at the shelves. "I can put them back," she said. "Don't," he said. "She would have agreed with you." He was quiet for a moment. She was very particular about systems. They did not say anything else for a while. The fire had caught properly now and the library was warm, and somewhere in the house a clock struck 4, and outside the October wind kept on with its business. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes, the letter that came to Harwick Hall 3 weeks ago. The one my stepmother burned." He turned to look at her. "That was from Pemberton," he said. "He wrote to inform you of the position. He thought it better to go through formal channels." A pause. "Your stepmother intercepted first." "I know," Maren said. "I saw the ash." He was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to learn to read. Not pity, not discomfort. Something more like the look of a person who has been trying to fit pieces together and has just found the one he was missing. "She sent you here thinking it would keep you occupied and away from the estate," he said. "She did not know I was looking into your father's will." "No," Maren said. "She would not have sent me otherwise. And you came, knowing something was wrong, without knowing what." "I came because it was better than staying," she said. "And because, I don't know, because someone had written to me about this house, even if I didn't get to read the letter." It seemed he was still looking at her. "It was a reason," he said. She looked down at the letters in her hands, at her father's handwriting, the crossed sevens. She thought about the roses at Harwick Hall, the convolvulus, her stepmother's in the grate, the particular way her stepmother's hands folded when a decision had already been made. She thought about the way Mrs. Tolley had looked at her differently, after she helped the new footman pick up the pan. She thought about the library, and the journals, and the drawer she should not have opened. "My father trusted your mother," she said. "Yes. I think," she said carefully, "that he would have been glad to know she had a son who takes the same view of things." He did not say anything to that, but he sat down in the chair across from her, which was the first time he had sat in the same room with her without a desk as an intermediary, and he stayed there while the clock struck the quarter hour, and then the half, and the fire burned steadily, and outside the October wind moved through the old trees on the Coldren grounds, stripping the last of the leaves from the branches and carrying them off to wherever leaves go when the summer is finally and entirely over. She would have to write to the solicitor. She would have to be patient and careful, and she could not afford to make mistakes, and it would take time, possibly a long time, before anything was resolved. But the letters were in her hands now. Her father's words, which her stepmother had tried to bury in ash, had instead traveled 100 miles north and waited in a drawer and found her anyway. She tucked them inside her jacket where they would rest against her ribs on the long walk back to the East Wing. Some things, she thought, find their way to where they're supposed to be, even when someone works very hard to make sure they don't.